Welcome to the 2025 Lake Pend Oreille State of the Lake presentation. My name is Andy Dux. I'm the Regional Fishery Manager in the Panhandle, and I've been directly involved in management of the Lake Pend Oreille fishery since 2008. The State of the Lake meeting has a long history and first began in 2005. Historically, this was an in-person public meeting held in the Sandpoint area. In 2021, we moved to a hybrid format that included an in-person meeting followed by posting online a recorded version of the presentation. The online recording has been popular with folks and allowed more people to view the presentation. This year, we're trying a slightly different approach. We're starting by posting this presentation online, and then we will hold an open house for anyone who would like to ask questions about the presentation and discuss the fishery with our Idaho Fish and Game staff. The open house will be held on March 27th at 6 p.m. and located at the University of Idaho Sandpoint Organic Agriculture Center. Please note that this location is different than in past years. For many years, we've used the Pend Oreille Event Center, but it was unavailable this year. The purpose of this presentation and open house is to share information about the Lake Pend Oreille fishery. With it being such a high-profile fishery, we've found value in providing an annual update and an opportunity to interact in person with our staff. After watching the presentation, we encourage you to attend the open house to ask questions and visit with us. We're going to provide a presentation similar to past years, as you'll see from the topics listed on the slide here. If you've not participated before, you'll see that this is a lengthy presentation with a lot of detailed information about the fishery. A consistent theme over the years has been folks telling us how much they appreciate the level of detail we include in the presentation. The first 15 minutes or so of the presentation offers background information that will be repetitive from past years if you've participated before, but that's still important to include for folks who are participating for the first time. New information will follow this first section of the presentation. I'd like to acknowledge and familiarize you with our fisheries staff who work on Lake Pend Oreille. Here I've listed permanent employees who spend all or a large portion of their time working on Lake Pend Oreille. Collectively, we have a tremendous team of dedicated fisheries professionals, and their work supports the management of the fishery. The Lake Pend Oreille fishery is the most intensively managed resident fishery in Idaho and one of the most intensively managed inland fisheries in the country. We're very fortunate to have the resources it requires to manage the fishery at a high level. The types of programs we implement generally aren't possible on other waters. It's not an accident that Lake Pend Oreille has regained its notoriety as a world-class trophy fishery for multiple species and sustained that reputation over the past decade. As we continue through the presentation, I hope you'll see the benefits from the programs we have in place and ultimately the quality and diversity of fishing opportunity this allows us to provide for anglers. Before moving on, I want to take a second to highlight some staff changes. We have a new Enforcement and Education Officer, Dakota Smith, who is starting soon. He replaces Dustin Mason, who recently took up promotion within Idaho Fish and Game. Also, Ken Bowens recently accepted a new position outside of our agency, and we're in the process of filling that position. Finally, Tyler Zumwalt has joined us as a new research biologist over the past year. The work we do is made possible by funding and collaboration with other agencies and the public. I'd like to acknowledge Avista and the Bonneville Power Administration for funding they provide through hydropower mitigation programs. Most of the work we do on Lake Pend Oreille is funded through these two mitigation programs. We also have tremendous support from other agencies, contractors, and cooperators that allow us to implement our programs. And we certainly value the support from anglers and other members of the public for our programs. The current Lake Pend Oreille fishery is diverse and offers good angling opportunity for a variety of species. During our recently completed creel survey, anglers reported catching 19 different fish species. 5 were native species and 14 were non-native. Additionally, 8 of the species caught are predators that regularly consume kokanee, often along with other fish species. As you can imagine, that means sustaining the fishery relies heavily on managing abundance of these predator populations. Anglers have spent about 200,000 hours annually fishing Lake Pend Oreille in recent years, so it's a fishery that generates a lot of effort. Over the past 70 plus years of conducting creel surveys on the lake, Rainbow trout and kokanee have always generated most of the angler effort. However, the fisheries become more diverse over time and allowed angler effort to increase some for other species. The lake's fishery is not only important locally, but it's a destination fishery that attracts anglers from throughout the region and even other parts of the country. As a result, it's both socially and economically valuable. Historically, Lake Pend Oreille supported three native sport fish species: bull trout, west slope cutthroat trout, and mountain whitefish. Since the 1930s, the lake has supported what we refer to as the traditional Lake Pend Oreille fishery. This is made up of the native bull trout and west slope cutthroat trout, and I will mention that bull trout are listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened, but Lake Pend Oreille has the notoriety of being one of the strongest migratory bull trout populations anywhere in the country. In the 1930s, non-native kokanee were established in the lake, and they've provided a dual role. They provide a very popular recreational harvest fishery, which for many years supported the most popular harvest fishery in Idaho. And they also provide the primary prey source for a number of predators in the lake, particularly bull trout and Girard strain rainbow trout that were introduced in 1941. These are also known as kamloops by many anglers. This is a strain of rainbow that's native to Kootenay Lake, British Columbia, and co-evolved with kokanee. When an abundant kokanee food supply is present, these fish can reach tremendous sizes. In the 1940s, Lake Pend Oreille became known as a world-class trophy fishery. 2 world record fish were caught in that era. The former world record rainbow at 37 pounds was caught in 1947, and in 1949, what's still the world record bull trout at 32 pounds was caught in the lake. These fish got to the sizes they did because of an abundant kokanee food supply, and we've found that since that time, whenever we can sustain high densities of kokanee, we can provide incredible trophy fishing opportunity in Lake Pend Oreille. The traditional Lake Pend Oreille fishery performed at a high level for many years, but eventually factors emerged that led to some declines in the fishery. Bull trout and west slope cutthroat trout suffered from tributary habitat loss and degradation and negative interactions with introduced species. Kokanee had some population declines, particularly starting in the late 1960s, resulting from spawning habitat loss, hydropower operations, and negative interactions with introduced species. Despite some declines, the population was generally sustained at a reasonably high level and still supported good fishing opportunity. This changed beginning in the late 1990s when kokanee began to rapidly decline, and by the 2000s were at risk of complete collapse because of high predation following a rapid increase in the lake trout population. As a result of fewer kokanee, the trophy rainbow trout and bull trout fisheries suffered. The severe decline of the kokanee population in the late 90s and early 2000s prompted us to focus our management efforts on recovery of the traditional Lake Pend Oreille fishery. With broad public support from anglers, we established recovery goals and a recovery program that really had 2 key components. We wanted to bring back the recreational sport fishing opportunity that was in jeopardy, specifically providing a consistent harvest fishery for kokanee, and also having an abundant enough kokanee population to fuel fast growth rates that would offer trophy fishing opportunity for rainbow trout and bull trout. In addition, we had native species conservation goals, specifically for bull trout and cutthroat trout, which were jeopardized by the increasing presence of lake trout in the system. Fortunately, our recovery efforts have been successful, and the Lake Pend Oreille fishery is now fishing at one of the highest levels it has in decades. In fact, we've moved out of a recovery phase and now are focused on sustaining the fishery at a high level. Recovery of the Lake Pend Oreille fishery has generally been viewed as one of the greatest fisheries conservation success stories in the western US. We're quite proud of that, and it's been really gratifying to see the resurgence of the fishery, especially because it required a lot of patience on the part of anglers as we rebuilt the fishery. But it's now performing at an incredible level, and like I said, trying to sustain that fishery is now our focus. Since recovery efforts, not only has the traditional fishery improved, But there's now expanded fishing opportunity for a variety of non-native species that have become established. Our challenge is trying to determine how to manage this suite of non-native species, determining what species we can manage for and which species we have to manage against in order to sustain the fishery over the long term. A number of non-native species like kokanee and rainbow trout have been part of the fishery for decades and have demonstrated an ability to coexist with native species, provide added angling opportunity, and be sustainable over time. The good news is most of the non-native species that have become established are largely compatible with our fishery management goals, such as smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, panfish, brown trout, lake whitefish, and they've added recreational value to the fishery. Unfortunately, there are 3 species that have proven to be a bigger threat to sustaining the traditional fishery, and those include lake trout, walleye, and northern pike, and we have to manage against these species. To provide a little bit more background into how we make these decisions, we're now going to show a video that we recently produced to try to help provide a little bit more background on our management approach.
Lake Pend Oreille. At nearly 1,200 feet deep and 90,000 surface acres, it's home to a host of popular fisheries.
Awesome.
Bull trout, west slope cutthroat trout, and mountain whitefish are native to the lake. Lake trout were introduced in 1925. Kokanee arrived in the 1930s, and Girard rainbow trout were introduced in 1941. Bass made their first appearance in the 1990s. And now, walleye and northern pike are the newest fish to become established in Lake Pend Oreille. As each new fish species arrived in the lake, anglers discovered new fishing opportunities.
The Lake Pend Oreille fishery is constantly changing. Our challenge is to try to adjust our management as those changes occur and try to provide a balance out here so that we're meeting our fishery objectives and providing the fishing opportunity that the public wants.
The question is, how do you manage a growing number of predatory fish species and provide for the continued survival of their primary prey? Kokanee.
So kokanee are really the foundation of today's Lake Pend Oreille fishery. There are 7 different predators in the lake that rely on kokanee for at least a part of their diet, some more than others, but that predation pressure on kokanee forces us to really pick and choose which species that we can manage for and which we need to manage against so that that kokanee food supply can support predation, recreational angling, and be sustainable into the future.
3 fish in particular, lake trout, walleye, and northern pike, pushed managers to make tough decisions. These fish not only put additional pressure on kokanee, they also proved to be incompatible with the survival of other fish species. A thriving lake trout population seriously threatened kokanee survival in the 1990s and early 2000s.
Lake trout have been part of the fishery for decades, but they existed at very low abundance until the late 1990s, after mysis shrimp allowed their population to really expand. So with an abundant mysis food supply, juvenile lake trout survival increased, the lake trout population rapidly expanded, and with the additional predation from lake trout on kokanee, it led to the collapse of the kokanee population.
Collapse of the kokanee threatened the entire Lake Pend Oreille fishery. To save it, Fish and Game called on anglers and a commercial fishing operation to harvest lake trout. Fewer lake trout allowed the kokanee population to recover. But then, 2 more top-tier predatory fish arrived.
Walleye and northern pike have become part of the equation in Lake Pend Oreille. Both resulted from illegal introductions upstream in Montana. Every time we add predation from a new species, it makes it more challenging to support the kokanee population. In addition, we have concerns about walleye having predation impacts on other fish that we're managing for, such as rainbow trout, bull trout, west slope cutthroat trout.
Experience of other western waters demonstrates that if walleye and northern pike populations are allowed to grow unchecked, they become a threat to numerous fish species in a lake.
Walleye are very diverse in their diet, and so they will be opportunistic and take advantage of a lot of different species, and in particular, cold water fish, such as rainbow trout, bull trout, West Slope cutthroat trout.
That's what we're trying to remove.
To sustain Lake Pend Oreille's fishery, fish managers actively control these new predator populations. Anglers are part of this effort.
An important thing for anglers to understand is, although we manage against lake trout, walleye, and northern pike, we're just trying to manage them at low density, not eliminate them completely from the lake. That's an exceptionally difficult thing to do, and frankly just not realistic. There will continue to be angling opportunity for those three species in the lake under our current management. And we rely on anglers to be part of the equation to keep those fish at low densities.
For fish managers, the end game is to create a balance in Lake Pend Oreille, one that maintains a diverse and compatible fishery while meeting the needs of the fishing public.
It would be great to have it all and be able to manage for every species that gets established in the lake, but that just isn't reality, and the biology doesn't allow for it. You can only support a certain biomass of fish in a particular water body. All these fish interact differently with one another, and so we have to make some hard choices at times and understand which species we can continue to provide long-term angling opportunity for without threatening the sustainability of the fishery.
I think you can see that Lake Pend Oreille is an incredibly dynamic fishery. We have a lot of challenges, particularly with the increasing number of species that become established in the lake. There are a lot of moving parts and pieces, and our challenge is how to adaptively manage the fishery in response to the changes that are occurring. Here I've shown some of the most common tools we have in the toolbox to manage the fishery. Throughout the presentation, I think you'll see how we use many of these tools, and in particular, I want to focus on a couple of the tools, lake trout suppression and walleye suppression, that get a lot of attention and I think warrant a little bit more background. We have a long history of lake trout suppression in Lake Pend Oreille. We started this program back in 2006, and this really was the driving factor behind recovery of the kokanee population and the trophy fishery. To do this work, we've contracted with a commercial fishing company, Hickey Brothers Research, that brought the ability to operate large-scale fishing gear and experience netting lake trout in the Great Lakes region. We work hand in hand with our staff on the boat to remove lake trout using this netting approach. In addition, we've enlisted the help of anglers through what we call the Angler Incentive Program, where we pay anglers $15 for every lake trout that they remove from Lake Pend Oreille. This work has been coupled with research and monitoring so that we can understand how to be most efficient with our netting efforts, avoid non-target species, and monitor the response that we're seeing not only in the lake trout population, but in the species that we're seeking to benefit. Our walleye suppression program has a much shorter history. We began a netting program in 2018 in response to a growing walleye population, and this is much smaller in scale. It's conducted in the spring during April and early May over a 15-day period. We do it at this time of year to focus on walleye that are aggregating in the pre-spawn and spawning window, and we've used telemetry to identify areas where we could be most efficient with that netting. Net sets are set over a short duration to minimize mortality to other species, and then just like with lake trout, fish are distributed within the community to food banks. Also, like we have with lake trout, there's an angler incentive program that we started in 2019 so that anglers can help be part of the solution. It's structured a little bit differently. We tag roughly about 100 fish that are in the lake in a given year that have $1,000 reward tags. The tags aren't known when an angler catches the fish, but if you turn in the heads, we scan the fish, and if it has one of these high dollar tags, you'll be given the reward. In addition, we have monthly drawings for $100 rewards. We give out 10 of those per month. So even if you turn in a walleye that doesn't have one of the $1,000 tags, you still have a chance to win money. I want to provide a little more background about the difference in scale between the lake trout and walleye suppression programs. This map shows all of our suppression netting locations from a typical year. The blue dots indicate locations where we set nets in deep water for lake trout, and the orange dots designate locations where we set nets in shallow water for walleye. You'll quickly notice that lake trout netting occurs throughout much of the lake and in far more locations. That's a result of having a netting program that occurs from September through April for a species that's more widely distributed. In contrast, walleye netting occurs only during a 15-day period in April and only in the northern portion of the lake. The majority of walleye netting occurs in the vicinity of the Pack River Delta, where walleye aggregate prior to spawning. In general, the amount of suppression netting effort in a given year is about 90% directed at lake trout and only about 10% directed at walleye. I share this to highlight the vast difference in scale between these two netting programs. In both programs, we take many precautions to minimize incidental catch of other species and, to the extent we can, avoid netting that will interfere with angling. In the next segment of the presentation, we'll share more details about species caught in the netting program. With that, I'll turn it over to Ryan Hardy, and he'll share research and monitoring updates.
Hi, my name is Ryan Hardy, and I'm the Principal Fishery Research Biologist on the Lake Pend Oreille Research Program. My section covers the latest in species status updates and fisheries science through 2024 on Lake Pend Oreille. The way I've structured this presentation is to first cover the important fisheries we are managing for in the lake, and then also touch on the status of species that pose potential risks to those fisheries. So I'll start with the kokanee update because kokanee are the cornerstone of the Lake Pend Oreille fishery, and they really are the number one reason why Pend Oreille is well known for growing such large fish species. I want to first show everyone a look at the total abundance of kokanee older than fry over the last few years. Evaluating total abundance tells us what is available for predatory fishes in the lake. Our surveys show that we continue to see exceptionally high levels of kokanee abundance through 2024, and we are sustaining a strong enough population to support the growth of predator species, as well as provide a kokanee fishery. We also see that in the estimate of total fry abundance. To orient you to this figure, the dashed line is the average fry abundance through 2024. As you can see, the fry abundance this past year is again above the average over the last 20 years. And although it can be difficult to fully predict the adult abundance based on fry abundance alone, we have confidence that there is enough kokanee reproduction sufficient to fully seed the lake for the coming years. Another way we evaluate kokanee is by evaluating total biomass, which is essentially the total weight of all the kokanee in the lake. And again, this directly influences how much food is available for kokanee predators. Starting in the mid-1990s, and for a little more than a decade, biomass was on a concerning trend downward. Through our research program, we determined that the primary reason for this was that predation of kokanee exceeded the new biomass produced each year, and this was a recipe for fishery collapse. In 2006, we began removing predators, and kokanee biomass started to respond immediately. In 2011 and 2012, another major shift occurred in the system when the mysid shrimp population collapsed. Although we don't know the exact cause of the collapse, this was a phenomenon observed to a greater or lesser degree elsewhere in the region. Mysid shrimp are a small freshwater shrimp and were introduced into the lake in the late 1960s with strong public support in hopes that they would become an abundant food source for kokanee. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and they wound up as a great food source for juvenile lake trout and competed with kokanee for zooplankton. After the mysids collapsed, we saw kokanee biomass rebound to a level that hasn't been observed in decades. This new era of kokanee production is a very good thing for growth of all species that consume kokanee. We pay close attention to these trends because although kokanee exhibit natural fluctuations in their population, these fluctuations can also potentially reveal changes in competition. Now I will switch over and talk about one of those species that benefits from an abundance of kokanee, and that is rainbow trout. We are actively involved in evaluating the rainbow trout fishery. Directly measuring rainbow abundance can be very difficult because these fish occupy offshore habitat and they spawn at or near spring runoff. But with the help of anglers, we can monitor the growth and catch statistics of these fish as an opportunity to keep our finger on the pulse of their performance. So a few years ago, we started the Lake Pend Oreille Angler Science Program to do just that. This is where we work with anglers to get completed logbooks and select a few anglers to assist us with fluoride and acoustic tagging, as well as get aging structures to evaluate growth. And this has really built a great relationship between the Pend Oreille anglers and provided us with valuable data. So the values of this program cannot be overstated. Here is an example of angler data over the past 9 years, and you can clearly see the evidence of how the restoration of the kokanee population has positively influenced the rainbows. The data from angler logbooks continue to show increasing proportions of larger fish, showing the fisheries consistently performing at a high level. The 3 fall derbies of 2024 all had winning fish above 20 pounds, which speaks to how tremendous the growth continues to be out in the lake. And we do expect to see this continue in 2025 as well. To show the type of rainbow trout growth we are seeing, here is a length and weight relationship figure from angler caught fish in recent years. The x-axis on the bottom represents the total length in inches, and the y-axis on the left is the weight in pounds. This is showing that fantastic growth I was referring to, and if you catch a fish that's between 35 and 39 inches, you're getting close to that 25-pound mark, just showing that phenomenal growth potential. Another way we gauge the performance of the fishery is by the return of visible external fluoride tags that are periodically put out in a portion of fish. Our staff, along with the assistance of dedicated anglers, have been fluoride tagging rainbows over the past several years. The return of these tags by anglers that recapture these fish helps us determine things like harvest and fishery participation. Tags can be clipped off, or you can write down the tag number or take a photo of it and then release the fish with the tag still in it. If you catch a fish with a reward tag, the dollar amount will be listed on the tag. These tags must be removed from the fish and mailed to the Fish and Game to claim the reward, whether the angler harvests the fish or not. Over the past few years, we have collectively put out over 1,800 of these tags. With the return of these tags, we estimated that the proportion of the population that was caught was around 12%. Another way to think about this is that 88% of the fish in the population was not caught in a given year. When we look at exploitation, which is the proportion of the population that is estimated to have been harvested in any of those years, it was only 3%. From a management perspective, this tells us that most rainbows do not get caught in a given year and harvest is low. Based on these results, we can feel comfortable that overharvest is not occurring. In addition to fluoride tagging, we are also using acoustic telemetry to answer some questions about rainbows in the basin. The acoustic tags will allow us to estimate things like where and when most rainbows spawn, the total number of spawns for an individual, and the causes of mortality. As I mentioned, it's difficult to get our hands on these pelagic fish, and so we are fortunate to have a good relationship with many of our rainbow anglers on the lake. Over the past few years, we've worked with several key anglers to help catch and provide us with those taggable fish. Now I will switch and talk just a minute about bull trout. Although they are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, Lake Pend Oreille supports one of the strongest populations in the country. While we don't currently allow a harvest opportunity for bull trout in the system, they do add diversity to the fishery in the form of an outstanding catch and release fishery for a native fish that reaches trophy sizes. In fact, in 2020, the state catch and release record of 39 inches was caught and unofficially weighed around 31 pounds, which is just shy of the world record bull trout caught in the lake in 1949. As with rainbow trout, these fish can reach tremendous size when there is an abundant kokanee food supply. To demonstrate this, here's a figure that shows the growth of bull trout captured as bycatch during lake trout suppression. The x-axis on the bottom is age and the y-axis on the left is total length. Here you can see their growth in more recent years, indicated by the white dashed line, has notably improved in the more recent years compared to their growth when the abundance of kokanee was extremely low, as depicted by the solid blue line. The benefit of a more abundant kokanee population is also translated into better survival, as we showed in last year's presentation, and a total abundance of bull trout that has remained stable over time. Later in this presentation, you will also hear about how this is also seen in the stability of juvenile densities in the tributaries as well. Another popular fishery in the lake is smallmouth bass. Smallmouth produce a phenomenal fishery in the lake, and they have been largely compatible with a sustainable fishery. We began a tagging study for smallmouth in 2021 in an effort to add to our understanding of angler use and harvest of this population through tag returns. A side benefit of the walleye netting program is that it has allowed us to tag a lot of smallmouth to do this evaluation. Similar to what we were doing with rainbow trout, for this evaluation we tagged over 400 smallmouth in 2024 with Floyd tags and monitored the return of those tags through the fishery. As you can see, we tagged a good representation of all size classes above 12 inches for this assessment. The results of the tagging study showed that exploitation, or the proportion of the population that was harvested as indicated by the green circles, was a little over 8% this past year. And the angler use, or the proportion that was caught, was around 24%, shown here by the blue diamonds. In looking at how harvest rates have changed over the past decade, smallmouth bass harvest and the proportion of use has shown to be remarkably stable in Lake Pend Oreille. A study we did in the Pend Oreille River in 2019 showed that the smallmouth bass population could withstand as high as 27% exploitation before the population actually started to decline. So this provides us confidence that we are well within the acceptable harvest levels and can expect to sustain a quality fishery. To take the most recent harvest rate a bit further though, when we look at what size groups are being harvested, it is clear that it is mainly those fish between 14 and 17 inches, showing that most of the largest fish that are caught are being released by anglers. Okay, now that I've covered the main fisheries updates, I'll transition to our evaluation and monitoring of some of the species that pose potential risks to the sustainability of the Lake Pend Oreille fishery, namely lake trout, walleye, northern pike, and mysid shrimp. Drilling down a bit deeper into the history of the problem, Lake Pend Oreille began facing some real challenges to meeting management objectives in the late 1990s, stemming from complex predation and competition factors on kokanee, which I'll try to illustrate here. Lake trout were introduced into Lake Pend Oreille in 1925, and they stayed at a relatively low population abundance for a long period of time. And at the same time, the kokanee population stayed at a high enough level that they supported a fishery and there was enough for an abundant predator population. But then, as I mentioned previously, mysid shrimp were introduced into the lake in the 1960s in hopes that they would be an abundant food source for kokanee. Unfortunately, because of the depth of the lake, kokanee could not effectively feed on mysids, but they did wind up as great food source for juvenile lake trout and competed with kokanee for zooplankton. Although mysid shrimp are relatively small, they are extremely effective at feeding on zooplankton, and after they became well established into Lake Pend Oreille, they had a big effect on the total abundance of kokanee that the lake could sustain. Even though mysids reduced the carrying capacity of kokanee in the lake was still able to maintain enough to support a kokanee fishery and produce a phenomenal rainbow trout fishery. However, it's this interaction between mysids and lake trout that caused a tipping point for kokanee. Although it took a bit of time to occur, because mysids were an excellent food source, the lake trout population began to increase at an exponential rate in the late 1990s. As a direct result, the kokanee, rainbow, and bull trout fisheries began to show population declines. The lake trout population was doubling every 1.5 years. And this is where we were faced with some tough decisions. And after having a lot of meetings with the lake trout experts and Lake Pend Oreille anglers, it was very clear that with no effective dial on mysid shrimp, The only action that could be implemented to save the fishery was a full-scale lake trout suppression program. So in 2006, we contracted with a commercial fishing company, Hickey Brothers Research out of the Great Lakes region, to implement this lake trout suppression netting program. And we also began an angler incentive program paying $15 per lake trout head turned in by anglers. We now have a long history of suppressing this species, and that management has paid dividends in terms of the quality of the fishing in Lake Pend Oreille. Early modeling efforts identified that our adult abundance target needed to be lower than where it was in the 1990s to avoid negative fishery impacts, which was around 2,500 adults. And the netting has been very effective at reducing adult abundance to meet that goal. This figure shows the trend in estimated abundance of spawning aged lake trout in Lake Pend Oreille through 2024. The abundance of adult lake trout peaked in 2005, and because of the netting efforts, we've seen a greater than 90% decline in adult abundance since then. And since this reduction, we've seen an outstanding recovery of the kokanee population as indicated by the solid orange line in this figure. As mentioned earlier, this has put us in a good position to provide enough kokanee for anglers as well as other predator species in the lake. And now the key is to maintain this level of kokanee production. As mentioned earlier, one species that has the potential to have an outsized impact on our ability to sustain a high kokanee population is mysid shrimp. Mysids have the ability, when highly abundant, to limit food availability for kokanee in Lake Pend Oreille, which in turn can have negative ramifications for apex predators. In looking at the mysid population through 2020, mysid abundance was still at a low density due to their apparent crash starting in 2012. This was a very good thing for kokanee, the growth of predatory fish species, and the fishery in general. The 2020 mysid densities were about 40% of the 1995 to 2011 trend, so things were optimal for kokanee production. Fast forward to the last few years, and we are now seeing mysid densities return to a high level. This is something we will be watching closely moving forward. We've been fortunate to have fewer mysids in the system for nearly a decade, and that has also benefited kokanee. We expect that a fairly strong kokanee population can be sustained with more mysids present, but this may give us less margin for error in terms of maintaining enough kokanee to support predator populations and a good kokanee fishery. Moving off of lake trout and mysids, I'll now spend a bit of time to talk about walleye. Walleye have been a big focus of our research in more recent years, and our main concern is the effect that walleye, if left unchecked, will have on our managed fisheries like kokanee. And a recent diet study confirmed this concern in finding that kokanee are a major food source for walleye in Lake Pend Oreille, especially as they get older. This figure is a result of our fall walleye index netting, or FWIN survey, over time. As you can see, walleye were exponentially increasing in catch rates from 2011 through 2017. We then implemented our 15-day netting suppression in 2018 to focus on adults, and incentivized angling in 2019 in hopes of curbing this increase. We did another study in 2020, and the results were encouraging, suggesting that our suppression actions were working to curb that increase. We then completed another survey in the fall of 2023, and unfortunately the results showed that our catch rates were back up to where they were in 2017. This wasn't a complete surprise because there was some early reports from fishermen that indicated the fishing was very good. Taking a closer look at what age classes made up that increase, we did see that the majority were young of year and 2-year-olds, indicating 2 strong year classes. In looking at our 15-day suppression netting catch, we saw an initial decline in catch rates since 2018, and it looked like our efforts were working well to suppress the adult population recruited to our larger mesh nets. But this past year, we picked up the big surge of fish, now 3 years old, that were detected in the FWIN. Again, it was not a big surprise because we had seen them in the FWIN survey the year prior, but it does highlight just how big the 2021 year class really was. Since the goal of our suppression effort is to focus on controlling or reducing the adult population, we use a mesh size that is not effective at catching walleye until they reach 3 years of age. In order to get a bit clearer picture of year class production in years outside of doing a FWIN survey, we also rely on angler harvest to highlight the big year classes. In looking at angler harvest over the past couple of years, it gives us a much better indication that there are a couple of strong year classes of walleye in the system. By examining the age structure of the harvest over the past couple of years, we see that the two largest production years were 2021 and 2023, because the 23 catch was made up primarily of 2-year-olds and the catch in 24 was primarily a mix of 1- and 3-year-olds. Although these big year classes get our attention, when we look at the number of age 4 and older fish in the harvest, it gives us a bit more confidence that the objective of maintaining or reducing the older walleye population is being met. The majority of female walleye mature at age 4, so these results are encouraging. These results should also be good news for walleye anglers in that there will also be plenty of walleye out there to catch this year. One thing to note is that with the rich diet opportunities that Lake Pend Oreille has to offer, walleye grow incredibly fast in their first year. As you can see in this figure, a 1-year-old walleye starts the year off at 10 3/4 inches and can be nearly 16 inches by the fall. They typically begin to recruit to fishing gear right around 13 inches, which they reach by July. In looking at where these fish are being harvested from, on this map, the more orange areas depict the greater numbers harvested. Angler harvest has been broadly distributed from the Clark Fork River to the Pend Oreille River. Anglers have caught and removed fish from the southern basin of the lake, but the bulk of the walleye action occurs at the northern parts of the lake and in the rivers. In comparison, the vast majority of removals via netting are occurring only in the northern basin of the lake. Just to step back and discuss our suppression netting for a minute, there are times when we get asked what other fish get caught in our nets. To show this, here's a figure that displays what's been captured in our walleye nets over the past 6 years. Here you can see incidental mortality of other species is low. For example, even though we catch a lot of smallmouth bass, they almost never die in our short set nets because they are hardy and they don't get wedged in the gill nets very easily. Most of the mortalities we see in the suppression netting, shown here in orange, are a direct result of intentional removal opportunities for walleye, lake trout, and northern pike, which are all species we're managing against. We only release these species if we're either trying to get an idea of exploitation by releasing them with floy tags, or to maintain the number of walleye with coated wire tags for the Angler Incentive Program. Now I will switch and talk about some interesting things that we've learned about walleye distribution in the basin through our telemetry program. We have an objective to maintain between 30 to 50 walleye implanted with acoustic tags at any one time in order to evaluate this. Acoustic tag locations are recorded on remote receivers that are distributed throughout the lake as shown here by the circles on the map of the basin. As you can see, we have a fair number of receivers to capture these movements. And although we have a lot of receivers, there are obviously limitations on how specific we can interpret those movements that we're detecting because of the coarse nature of the detections that occur. Just quickly, I'd like to show everyone an example of how this acoustic tagging program is really unraveling some interesting movement information that can be beneficial for both increasing the angler catch rates as well as helping us in our suppression efforts. For example, this is a map with animations of tagged walleye making migrations to the lower part of the Clark Fork River. Walleye movement into the Clark Fork depends on multiple factors, including water temperature. This is a figure from last year showing how the water temperatures warmed in the Clark Fork. And nearing the end of March, we detected an increasing number of walleye enter the main Clark Fork River that were previously staged out on the delta. We're still piecing together if temperature alone, or a combination of other factors such as flow or photo period, are influencing movement, but this just shows you an example of the types of information we're using to evaluate factors that influence the movement of walleye in the basin. Okay, now I'll move from walleye to talk a bit about northern pike in the Lake Pend Oreille Basin. Pike were first documented below Cabinet Gorge Dam in the 1970s, which is consistent with the time they became widespread in Montana and other parts of Idaho. for whatever reason, pike remained at a low level and only showed up incidentally in sampling gear until basically the last decade. And really, it's just been in the last 5 years that the majority of pike have been showing up in our routine sampling. We're concerned about northern pike in the system for a variety of reasons, the biggest of which is their potential impact on migratory fish from tributaries, as well as their impact on soft-rayed native non-game fish that inhabit nearshore areas. The good news is that we do get our hands on a fair number of these in our walleye suppression netting, and anglers harvest a good share of them as well. As you can see here in this figure, catch rates of our bycatch of pike in our walleye nets has steadily increased over the past few years. We've also seen an increase in pike bycatch in our lake trout suppression netting over time as well. This is notable because lake trout nets are generally fished deeper than walleye nets, from 60 to 250 feet deep. Anglers are harvesting a fair number of pike in the system. We released about 200 pike with floy tags in 2023, and the return of those tags indicated that there was around 45% harvested, and the number of fish that were caught by anglers was around 52%. This suggests that if a pike is being caught in the lake, it has a high likelihood of being harvested. So similar to walleye, the hope is that angler harvest, coupled with our suppression netting for walleye, will be enough to keep these fish from becoming a problem for our managed salmonid fisheries. To get a better understanding of the impact that pike might be having on the fisheries, we've partnered with the University of Idaho to dive into a diet study similar to what we've done in the past for walleye a few years back. The difference in this study is that they are shorter set nets to provide the ability to release pike and most bycatch alive, and also so they can answer some key population questions. This should provide us with information on food habits, bioenergetics, population size, harvest, and a suite of other metrics. This should also provide us with a better idea of directions we may need to go in terms of pike management. So that concludes my update on the fisheries within the lake, and now we will transition to hearing from Ben Birdsall on results from tributary monitoring.
Hello everyone, my name is Ben Birdsall. I'm a fisheries biologist with Avista. My general area of operations are the tributaries to Lake Pend Oreille and the lower Clark Fork River. And today I'll be discussing our work in partner with Fish and Game under the Clark Fork Settlement Agreement regarding tributary monitoring, habitat mitigation, and public outreach. Beginning with tributary monitoring, we conduct surveys on 25 tributaries to Lake Pend Oreille and the lower Clark Fork River. These surveys are conducted using a backpack-equipped electrofisher in which fish are stunned in the electrical field, and then 2 individual netters place these fish into a live well bucket. At the end of the survey, fish are counted by species, weighed, and total length is measured, and then a subset of cutthroat trout and all bull trout are tagged with a passive integrated transponder, also known as a PIT tag, which has a unique ID number that we can use to monitor fish movement and migration timing. At the end of the survey, all fish are released alive, and then this information is used to assess species composition by tributary, the species densities, and the overall distribution within the basin. As stated previously, a total of 25 streams were surveyed over a 15-year period from 2009 to 2023. These surveys were conducted on 96 reaches spread throughout the basin. Reach was defined as a 100-meter section of the stream that was placed every or every other river kilometer. And these streams were sampled on a 5-year rotational basis in which 5 streams were surveyed every single year. So for example, if Granite Creek was surveyed in 2009, it was surveyed again in 2014. This was a broad-based approach in which we sampled most fish-bearing streams in the basin, and we sampled the entirety of the stream from the mouth to the headwaters. And again, this was a repeated sample, so this allowed us to assess species distribution and density over a long time scale over the whole basin. Moving into our results, I first want to orient you to the figure on the right, as this will appear in several iterations over the next couple of slides. This figure indicates the density estimates for each species that will appear by round. So round 1 on the left, round 2 in the center, and round 3 on the right. And a round was defined as a 5-year sampling period in which all streams were surveyed. And then the circles indicate the density estimates at each individual reach, with larger circles indicating a higher density estimate of fish. Beginning with West Slope cutthroat trout, we see that they are our most commonly surveyed species, and they are ubiquitous throughout the basin. They display both resident and migratory life histories, with the majority of our resident fish appearing to inhabit locations above barriers, such as waterfalls. These migratory fish rear in the streams, move to Lake Pend Oreille to mature, and then return to the streams to complete their life cycle. And overall, what we see with West Slope cutthroat trout is that they have stable densities and they are distributed broadly throughout the basin. Moving on to bull trout. Bull trout juveniles are generally found in higher gradient sections of our larger tributaries, such as Upper Grouse Creek, high gradient tributaries to larger systems, such as the tributaries to Pack River and Lightning Creek, as well as in high densities in our direct tributaries of Trestle Creek, Granite Creek, and Gold Creek. It is hypothesized that all bull trout in Lake Pend Oreille are migratory in nature, so there is no evidence of resident populations in the basin. Bull trout over this 15-year time period at the basin scale, so grouping all tributaries together, have been stable. And this is largely due to what is known as the portfolio effect. So the portfolio effect describes that while one stream may decrease, another stream increases, so that the overall densities at the basin scale remain stable. So, for example, in round 1 and round 2, Grouse Creek production was relatively high compared to the rest of the basin. However, in round 3, Grouse Creek densities did decrease, but while they decreased, densities in Caribou Creek increased, so that when you look at the basin scale at large, your overall average densities remain the same. And the biggest driver of this portfolio effect is most likely due to environmental variability, in that these streams exhibit wide fluctuations in flow and temperature. But in Pend Oreille, we have many different types of tributaries, such as direct tributaries, larger systems, and then high gradient streams to these larger systems. So overall, while factors may not be suitable for high production in one stream, they're generally suitable for high production in another. The final species I will cover today are rainbow trout. Rainbow trout in the Pend Oreille Basin are predominantly composed of the Girard strain. These are fish that can reach lengths of 30 to 34 inches and exceed weights of 20 pounds. The majority of Girard strain rainbow trout display that migratory life history, and their juveniles can be found in our lower gradient, larger tributaries, such as the main stem Pack River, the middle and lower portions of Grouse Creek, and main stem Lightning Creek. Now, I want to highlight main stem Lightning Creek, as you will see no density estimates there. And this is due to the nature of Lightning Creek. It is a relatively large system in which our sampling efficiency is not adequate to produce reliable density estimates. However, we did conduct some surveys in main stem Lightning Creek in 2023, and while we were not able to produce reliable density estimates, we did see a large amount of rainbow juveniles, which leads us to believe that a large portion of our production is occurring in main stem Lightning Creek. Now, Girard strain rainbow trout also can help enforce that idea of the portfolio effect. So, for example, in round 1, a large portion of our production was occurring in main stem Grouse Creek. However, in round 2, that production did decline slightly, but our density estimates began increasing in the East Fork of Lightning Creek. And then in round 3, both Grouse Creek and East Fork Lightning Creek densities decreased. However, our densities increased in Caribou Creek and Hell Roaring Creek. And overall, this can further demonstrate that while individual streams may increase or decrease depending on the environmental conditions, the overall production of juveniles at the basin scale remains stable. To summarize these results, again, this tributary monitoring occurred over a 15-year time period from 2009 to 2023. And to direct you to the figure on the right, on the bottom x-axis are individual species. From left to right is bull trout, west slope cutthroat trout, rainbow trout, and west slope rainbow hybrids. And on the y-axis on the left are our density estimates of fish per 100 meters squared. Then the different colors represent each round. And again, a round is a 5-year time period. So round 1 is blue, round 2 is orange, and round 3 is gray. And what we see is that we have stable populations at the basin scale. We did conduct a statistical test to assess if there were any significant changes between rounds, and we found that there was no significant change. What this demonstrates is that our species are broadly distributed and they are stable at the basin scale, which is most likely due to the portfolio effect. Also, our streams are most likely fully seeded, so we would not expect to see an increase of production for any species outside of habitat improvements through mitigation efforts. Moving forward, we are transitioning into a new sampling protocol for our tributary monitoring. So again, that tributary monitoring was conducted on that 5-year rotational style, which each stream was surveyed once every 5 years. This sampling protocol was great for determining species distribution and individual stream composition and a trend over a long period of time. However, due to only surveying a stream once every 5 years, we're not able to assess those relationships between spawner counts and how many juveniles are produced, as well as habitat factors that may affect juvenile abundance on a year-to-year scale. So what we have done is we have divided our streams into either priority streams or rotational streams, and then each stream has 2 to 3 reaches that are selected from it. The priority streams will be sampled on an annual basis, and then the rotational streams will maintain that 5-year rotational style. These priority streams were selected as bull trout and rainbow trout streams, in which we have active habitat projects, pit monitoring stations, or they important for the production of these species. This will allow us to assess those finer scale questions to help us understand what drives production of juveniles in the basin. Changing gears to habitat mitigation, again, we conduct habitat projects throughout the Lake Pend Oreille Basin. One such that was completed in 2024 was on Rattle Creek. Rattle Creek is a large tributary to Lightning Creek and has been negatively affected by legacy land use practices, such as constant road washout and large-scale timber harvest. This has led Rattle Creek to accumulate large boulders and cobbles and to not accumulate those finer gravels and sediments. This has led Rattle Creek to largely go subsurface in the late summer and early fall, which has decreased connectivity, pool availability, and overall spawning material for these fish. So the goal of this project was to slow down Rattle Creek and give it stuff to work with so that it could reaccumulate those smaller gravels. So what we did is, partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, we marked approximately 170 trees, as you can see in the figure on the bottom. And those trees were placed into Rattle Creek to try and slow that flow, increase the water table, and create more spawning and rearing habitat for our fish. Again, this project was completed in 2024. However, we will monitor it over the next 10 years to assess the effectiveness of this large-scale wood addition. I want to direct you to the figure on the right. So the top portion is a photo of Rattle Creek before wood addition. The bottom photo is after wood addition, to really highlight how much wood we placed in that stream. And the figure on the left indicates a bull trout red that was constructed underneath one of these trees in the fall of 2024. So these fish are already using this habitat, and hopefully over time these trees will help accumulate more spawning gravel, and we will see even higher production of fish throughout Rattle Creek. The final thing I will discuss today is education and enforcement. We support an education and enforcement officer with Idaho Fish and Game, and this position was previously held by Dustin Mason. However, he has taken on a new role with Idaho Fish and Game. So the new officer filling this role will be Dakota Smith, and he will start relatively shortly. This is a Lake Pend Oreille specific enforcement presence with a focus on bull trout. However, this position also conducts field trips and educational outreach to educate the public on bull trout regulations as well as management that is conducted on Lake Pend Oreille. And with that, I will hand this back to Andy to complete the rest of the presentation.
Ryan and Ben just shared a lot of great information that we're using to evaluate and manage the Lake Pend Oreille fishery. I just want to leave you with some take-home messages regarding the overall status of the fishery. Collectively, for species we manage for, our fishery management objectives are largely being met. We have a diverse, multi-species fishery that's offering both harvest and trophy fishing opportunities. In addition, results from our recent creel survey showed that angler satisfaction is very high for species that we manage for. We're also meeting our native species conservation objectives for bull trout and west slope cutthroat trout. For species that we manage against, lake trout, walleye, and northern pike, our management is generally proving effective, although we have a lot more work ahead of us to keep these populations in check. This is particularly the case with walleye, where we've seen some large year classes produced in recent years. This will continue to challenge our ability to keep this population at low density with current levels of suppression. The good news is that adult walleye have thus far been held at low density, and we're hopeful that this will continue. We're also optimistic that removing northern pike during the course of our existing netting efforts, along with continued angler harvest, will be sufficient to keep their population at low density. The upcoming northern pike research project will allow us to better evaluate how we're doing on that front. Despite the concerns we have about these three fish species, they are providing additional fishing opportunity in the system. We also learned from the recent creel survey that anglers targeting these three species have fairly high satisfaction ratings. That's important because there's a common perception that because we're managing against these species, that fishing for them is poor. In fact, that's not the case, as there's very good fishing opportunity being provided by these fish, and that's going to continue in the future because eliminating their populations just isn't feasible. I just touched on this, but the recreational fishery is currently performing very well. In fact, I would argue that fishing on Lake Pend Oreille is about the best it's ever been. I know that's a bold statement, but I truly believe that's the case. The lake is producing more trophy rainbow trout than any other water body in the world. Kokanee continue to be abundant, providing high catch rates and harvest opportunity. We have one of the strongest native bull trout populations in the country, along with good numbers of native west slope cutthroat trout. The smallmouth bass fishery is excellent, both in terms of catch rates and fish size structure. And even populations of incompatible species that exist at lower density, like lake trout, walleye, and northern pike, are abundant enough for anglers to successfully target and occasionally catch trophy class fish. If that's not enough, consider the added fishing opportunity that can be quite good at times for somewhat overlooked species like yellow perch, brown trout, lake whitefish, and black crappie. Of course, there's always room for improvement, and we'll continue trying to squeeze as much juice as we can out of this fishery for anglers. That said, the bar is set pretty high right now, and our main focus is on sustaining the fishery at the current level. As we've seen in the past, things can change very quickly in a large and increasingly complex lake like Lake Pend Oreille. Fish populations are influenced by a whole host of factors, including environmental conditions, food web dynamics, and habitat changes. While many factors contribute, we recognize that sustaining the fishery is currently most dependent on managing the balance between predators and prey. We're also somewhat at the mercy of mysid shrimp, as we've shown their abundance impacts the carrying capacity of kokanee in the lake. I also can't overstate the importance of continued public engagement and support from folks like you. Without it, implementing management actions that work to sustain the fishery just wouldn't be possible. I'd like to wrap up with a few quick updates that may be of interest. First off, we completed a new access site development in 2024. It's located on the Pack River Delta, north of the railroad, and is accessible off of Highway 200. We recently completed a habitat restoration project on the Delta that required a staging area for construction equipment. After the project was completed, we turned the staging area into a parking lot and boat ramp that will be useful for launching small watercraft during the summer season. It will not be usable when the lake elevation is drawn down. This project turned out great and should provide access to some good summer fishing opportunity in and around the Delta. We hope you enjoy using it. Another update that hopefully you've already noticed is that our 2025 through 2027 fishing regulations took effect on January 1. Thanks to those of you who provided input during the process. While a few changes did occur in the Panhandle region, there weren't any changes to Lake Pend Oreille or connected waters. We also recently completed our new statewide fisheries management plan for 2025 through 2030. This sets management direction and is the guiding policy document for all waters in Idaho over the next 6 years. Again, thanks to those of you who provided input as this was being developed. A new opportunity is being considered this year in the form of allowing spearfishing opportunity for some game fish species in certain waters. Based on public input received by the Idaho Fish and Game Commission, negotiated rulemaking was recently completed that now allows the Commission to set seasons not only for unprotected non-game species, but also game fish species. At the request of the Commission, we are currently working on developing proposals that will be opened for public comment beginning sometime in April. Proposals will be limited to species classified as incompatible in our fisheries management plan, and particularly focused on species and in waters where we are actively suppressing those fish populations. Some species in Lake Pend Oreille are likely to be included in upcoming proposals, so keep an eye on our website for more information in coming weeks. This is a topic that we expect many anglers to have opinions about, so please let us know your thoughts when the comment period opens. If you'd like to stay plugged in with our outreach efforts throughout the year, check out the Lake Pend Oreille Fisheries webpage located on the Fish and Game website. You can find this at the web address listed at the top of the screen. You can also scan this QR code on your smartphone and it'll take you to the website. This is a great place to periodically check and look for different news stories that we share with anglers throughout the year. Information from the Lake Pend Oreille Fisheries page is also posted to our Idaho Fish and Game Panhandle Region Facebook page. This is another way that you can find the information, and the address is listed here, or again, scan the QR code to go directly to the page. That concludes the 2025 Lake Pend Oreille State of the Lake presentation. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you at the open house on March 27th. If you can't make the open house, please feel free to reach out to our staff throughout the year if you have any questions about the fishery.